coming together and believing in the fact that they are part of what makes us, government or community or the city itself. We make up the city. We should be a part of the solution of what those problems are for those communities around us.
The community of Poway is still in mourning and came together last night to focus on solutions. And this morning, we continue our conversation. We're
joined now by one of last night's panelists, Tammy Gillies, Anti-Defamation League Regional Director. Tammy, we know you were out late last night, so thanks so much for coming in here early this morning. What was the big takeaway? Was this event a success?
I think it was a success. I think that the community wants to have this conversation. And I applaud the school district also for coming out and hearing what people's concerns are.
Some parents, some students, they did express some frustration. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I actually spent the weekend at 3 different synagogues and heard from a lot of students that their teachers are not talking to them. And I think it's because they just don't know what to say. They don't know how to address the issue of hate.
Not everyone was able to attend, obviously. There's people from all over the region who are interested in this. Yeah. So for those people that weren't able to attend, what are some of the solutions? What are some of the takeaways? What should children be doing in a situation like this?
So I want to say I think the biggest takeaway is communication. So the school has to communicate to the parents, and the parents have to talk to their kids, and the teachers have to talk to the students, because the students come in and they want to be validated. They're afraid, they're upset, and they need somebody to hear them. And that has to be the parents and teachers.
Do you think that the teachers, after attending, this was at a school yesterday.
Yes.
Do you think that that's something they're going to start talking about and addressing it more? Because obviously the kids are frustrated. They want to be heard.
Yeah, I think in Poway, Dr. Kim Phelps, the superintendent, is doing a really good job of trying to address these issues. It takes time, and after a tragedy like this, people don't really know how to react. So it's a learning curve.
I understand some of the teenagers, they talked a little bit about wanting to be heard more. They want their voices to be heard. They feel like they're not being heard right now. They're not being understood by adults, by teachers, by some of their peers. What advice do you have for those students?
I was telling the students last night that they have a voice and they need to use their voice. They can make the change in their schools. They should feel empowered to start groups, to have these conversations. On our website, which is adl.org, we have free resources for teachers, for parents, for students, how to talk about these issues.
This conversation comes on a day where there's another school shooting yesterday in Colorado. I posted the question on my Facebook page, what should be done? When does this stop? You get mixed reactions. Some people saying arm the teachers, put up get more security at schools. Yeah. I mean, parents are concerned and so are students.
Yeah. All I can say is that this is the world that we're living in, so it could be at your school, but it could be at your movie theater, and it could be at your local Target or Walmart, and so we have to have an awareness of ourselves about security everywhere that we go in the community.
What about mental health?
Mental health is a big, big issue. There's still stigma around mental health. Right. It's not my area, but I can tell you there's a lot of great organizations out there helping the community. Our friends at Jewish Family Service were on the scene the Saturday of the Poway shooting, talking to victims, talking to witnesses. So people need to reach out to these resources.
Oh, it was a great discussion that was had. So Tammy, thanks so much for being involved in that and for coming in here this morning. We sure appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.